Pastor, thanks for joining me this morning. I really appreciate you carving out some time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back, Todd.
I have a lot to talk to you about. Obviously, we had the Kirk celebration yesterday, but there's a real feeling among the world, actually, that something is going on that's much bigger than we really understand. And it's spiritual, and some type of battle is happening. What do you see is the basis or the genesis of that? I mean, what is happening that we're experiencing right now?
Well, I think a couple of people have used the image of the tide turning, right? And so when I was a younger man, when I was in college 30 years ago, the tide was coming in, and we saw that was the age of political correctness, right? And I think it crested about 5 years ago with the woke movement. And I think it really is starting to go out now. As to what's behind that, I think it's a movement of the Holy Spirit. It's the providential hand of God who governs and ordains all these things. He allowed that tide to flow in the first place for reasons that are known to him, and I think his hand is on us now to save us from that and to turn that tide around.
And how does a Christian, especially young men and women, how do they pour gas on that and I guess preserve and build it for their own future? Because that's what we're looking at, is their future, right?
That's exactly right. Well, I think some of this is generational. I think I gave some remarks at the Charlie Kirk Vigil here in Connecticut last week, and I outlined what I thought were the generational sort of roles or destinies for boomers, Xers, millennials, and Zoomers. And really, this is going to be the Zoomers moment, I think. So the wind is in their sails. The wind is at their back. I think what they need to do in order to pour gas on that, as you say, is to double down on prayer, morning and evening, even if it's a simple just checking in with God, Bible reading, again, morning and evening, as much as that's possible, as they can do that. I've had more interest in my 1-year Bible reading plan that I personally didn't come up with it, but it's the one I've been using. I've had more interest in that in the last 2 weeks than I've had in 15 years of ordained ministry. So I would say stick with that. And then holiness of life. Where are you spending your time on the internet? Who are you spending time with? What are you putting into your body? Are you exercising? Are you maintaining a healthy weight? Are you being the kind of man that an Erica Kirk will want to marry? Right? These are the questions that I would put towards young men and how they can improve and make this movement their own.
I didn't receive it, but it went to a colleague of mine, a letter from a English Christian pastor. And he was saying that we British Christians would get excited when once a year Queen Elizabeth would make a mild but sincere reference to the love of Jesus Christ in her Christmas address. And then he listed all of the things that he saw yesterday. And he said, all of it was done before and by the most powerful people in your nation and the world. And you guys should be on your knees thanking God for your country. It is a light to the world. I found that fascinating. And this is the cradle of liberty where you are in Connecticut. But there's a lot of problems in Connecticut, and you've been on the forefront of fighting for that. Does this revival play into that, saving the state of Connecticut and other blue states?
Well, I think it does. And I think, people have been praying for revival in New England for as long as I can remember. And I think it's finally here. The thing about the way God moves is he doesn't move the way we expect him to, or even tell him to, right? He moves in his own time. He moves in his own way. So I think revival in Connecticut isn't necessarily going to look like revival in the 18th or 19th century. But it's real, it's substantial. And I think where it's going to impact and be felt is in the institutions.
Yes.
I don't know how that works, but I preached a whole sermon yesterday about calling to account the dishonest stewards, right? This was Jesus' message, his parable in Luke chapter 16. And so many of our institutions in a state like Connecticut have been headed up by dishonest stewards. And I do believe an accounting is now being demanded of them. And the things that are done in darkness are going to be shown in the light, and things that are whispered in secret will be shouted from the rooftops. So it may not be a revival in terms of numbers, although I pray for that, but I think it's going to be a shaking of the institutions.
Wow. That's so true, because they are so rotten and corrupt and infiltrated right now. And I found in the Kirk Memorial, Tucker's talk about, one of his favorite stories 2,000 years ago, when Jesus was searching for truth and they killed him for it. And that struck me, actually. So how should people go about searching for truth right now?
Well, as I said, I think it's in the pages of the scriptures. It's the holy, the revelation of God's thoughts, his message to us are contained. The record of that is contained in the Bible, and it is possible to read that book by yourself and get a clear understanding of what it means. It's best, I think, to read it together with other faithful Christians, those who have been reading it for their whole lifetimes. So I would join a Bible study. I'd find a house church. I'd find a church that's faithful in proclaiming the gospel biblically, and that's how you're going. I mean, I've been teaching a new members class, our second in a year, which is great for a church that almost closed last year. But yesterday I was introducing the prospective new members to this idea that Christianity is not a religion we need to go in search of. Our God has already revealed himself to us, and we simply need to accept that as true.
You bring up a good point on your thoughts on Connecticut revival. Tell us what you're doing in Woodbury. Tell us the history of that church and what you're doing.
Well, it's a great history. It goes back to 1659 when settlers from Stratford, which is along the coast, came up. So we're talking about the second generation of settlers who migrated inland. Like every, I think, pioneer column in history, they got a little lost, double back. Yeah. Found a nice valley to settle in, called it Woodbury. This was the reservation that was set aside for settlement. And from that original, what was called an ecclesiastical society, which was a charter or a corporation that allowed the town to form and tax the residents for the upkeep of a church and maintain the minister and provide basic education for the children, grew the town of Woodbury and then several of the towns surrounding it. In the meeting house where I now which dates from 1818, so the meeting house itself is over 200 years old, are the names and dates of all the towns in the area that were founded from this church and seeded from the original pioneers who came into Woodbury.
Wow. And so how is it going with the resurrection of your church, essentially?
Praise God, it's going well. As I said, we were down to probably about 8 to 10 active members on the rolls this time last year, a true remnant. We both took a risk. They called me. I answered the call, knowing that, we had no earthly reason to expect success, right? And so, certainly it wasn't like we're bankrolled by some large church planting organization or have the denomination backing us, paying for this. This is the little money that's in the bank and the free will offerings that's put into the plate. So God has blessed us. We had a crop of new members join in the spring, and we have another group joining in October. And I've seen attendance, new people coming in the last 2 weeks since the murder of Charlie Kirk. I've just gotten emails and a number of people showing up, families with young children.
Wow.
And I think they're able to find me because I've taken some very public stands on things. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a church where the yes is yes and the no is no. And so we have a very, simple and straightforward statement of faith on the website that says, this is what we believe. This is what we think is moral and good. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. And I know no one's perfect. Everyone is welcome, sinners especially, but we're not going to compromise on what's right and wrong.
Wow. Fantastic. What would you say to other pastors who may not be in the same vein as you are? Because there's a lot of problems in the Protestant church that I want to talk to you about in a minute. But
there sure are.
Yeah.
Well, some I think are just beyond the pale, and I pray for them. But I don't. When I see them flying rainbow flags, I think that they're raising the flag of the enemy, right? So I'm not even sure they're pastors. I think the word pastor means shepherd. If you're doing that, you're really signaling that you're a wolf, and that's what's changed in my lifetime, right? I mean, 30 years ago, you weren't flying those flags, but you were speaking in code. You were saying things from the pulpit that nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We knew, whose side you were on, and you were advancing slowly the progressive agenda. All of that's dropped. The masks have dropped right now. So if I see pastors flying that flag or preaching that kind of gospel, my prayer is that God removes their pulpits from them and closes those churches, or at least gives those churches hands them over to faithful pastors. But there's another group of pastor who is faithful, and I count myself in this group. Formerly, up until a few years ago, we preach the gospel. We're orthodox. We're clear in our messaging, but we pull our punches in the application, and we don't necessarily spell out that you cannot vote for these things. And if you're not voting, you need to get out and vote. And while the church is not a political party, there's no excuse for voting Democrat at this point anymore. You especially in a state like Connecticut, you cannot support that party at this point. And we really have to tell the Republican Party that our support of them is dependent on their willingness to emulate what we saw yesterday at that memorial. And I'm seeing that in the Republican Party in Connecticut. I'm seeing representatives and senators really get out there and speak from their heart, speak change, trying to shake up the Republican establishment in this state. I've called out the Republican establishment from the pulpit saying, some of you guys are not answering emails. Your websites are out of date. I'm talking about the local, the town committees. The way Connecticut's organized is we have 169 towns and each town has a Republican town committee. And that's the machine. That's the process by which nominations are put forward, by which people are recruited for statewide and national federal office. And, there's infighting. There's kind of a lack of vision in many cases. There's people who've known each other all their lives, and they're not necessarily recruiting younger blood. I said earlier about the generational destinies here. God love them. I love them. They're my parents, the boomers, but it's time to recruit the younger generations. It's time to give the floor to younger people coming up, because you're not going to be around for forever. And you need to build the movement so that it continues and grows.
Your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Well said. Well, let me dive into that a little bit. How far should a pastor go in the pulpit? What do you think the limits are?
Well, I mean, in theory, there was a legal limit up until recently in the form of the Johnson Amendment, where you could be threatened with your tax exempt status. The Trump administration has suspended enforcement of that amendment, but pastors are so used to, it's like a muscle that they haven't used in 70 years, 80 years. So it's like, when your leg falls asleep and you get up and try to walk, you're just going to fall over. So I have some sympathy for pastors who are just trying to figure this out. Sure. I had to figure it out too. And I've really only figured it out in the last year or so. And that is, be faithful, study the word, follow the promptings of the Holy Spirit, and be bold and courageous. I can't tell you what to preach in your sermons. You know your town, you know your flock, you know the state, you know what's going on, but don't be afraid to draw out the implications of the gospel, right? When Jesus speaks to the Pharisees and he says that, your father was a liar and a murderer from the beginning, don't be afraid to draw out the implications of what, being a liar and a murderer means, right? It doesn't mean that you necessarily kill somebody in cold blood, which most of us are not guilty of. There's the lying and the murdering that goes with the complacency in the face of the abortion industry, and of the human trafficking industry, of the sexual grooming and exploitation of children. All of this is what the late Pope John Paul called the culture of death, right? Mm-hmm. So speak out against that, and speak out against it in very specific terms and in very specific ways. Don't be afraid to be very, very clear.
Excellent. What's going on with your, interaction with the Connecticut government? Have they come after you, or what's
you may know the story where I had tweeted out a letter that I had written to the Attorney General of Connecticut, William Tong, and I had asked him to investigate the allegations by Project Veritas regarding a church in the Hartford area that was allegedly, where the pastor and the clergy and others were allegedly involved in the helping a minor child transition against the parents' wishes. Mm-hmm. So I said, look, if this is true, on the face of it, this is the kind of thing you should be investigating. And there's a constitutional clause here that allows you to do it. Churches, you don't have to worry about running afoul of free exercise, because this is licentious behavior, and the Connecticut Constitution outlaws churches or prevents churches from practicing or promoting licentious behavior or anything that would hurt the public, right? So go ahead and investigate this. And he ignored me. And then two senators, Republican senators, asked him to investigate, and he wrote back and said he wouldn't, because he didn't think Project Veritas was a reliable source. Fine. But then I tweeted something. I retweeted my letter challenging him to please investigate anyway, because the charge is serious enough. And I used the slogan, silence equals death, which is a LGBT slogan from the 1980s, going back to the AIDS crisis. And it's still used. The Episcopal bishops of Connecticut used it as recently, I think, as last June in a letter about Israel and Palestine. So he had the state police call me and investigate, what exactly did I mean by silence equals death? Was that a threat? So I thought, but this is outrageous, right? Not only is it just a tin ear, totally deaf to the lingo of his own party, his own agenda, but it's turning it around and using it against me for calling out what potentially is a pretty bad crime by a fellow minister, right? So it's a classic case of blame the victim, or at least in this case, blame the whistleblower. And I'm not even the whistleblower. I'm just saying, hey, somebody else blew the whistle here. Are you listening? Are you gonna respond? But it's a classic case of blaming the people who are shouting fire and the bystanders who are calling for intervention, instead of actually going after the cause of the problem. And I found that to be tremendously sad. I was frightened a bit and annoyed and angry, but at the end of the day, sad that we have someone like that in public office.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's been a revival everywhere, and I'm hearing a lot from the youth, especially the young men, that they're drawn toward the Orthodox Church and some of the more, I guess, ancient Christian religions. What do you say to young men who say, I want something that has tradition and hasn't changed and doesn't have rainbow flags on the building, but how do you I guess make them attracted to Protestantism?
Well, I certainly understand the appeal of the Orthodox Church and that rich tradition. It's something I'm pretty familiar with coming out of the Anglican or Episcopal tradition. The Roman Catholic Church has it as well. So I get it. What I would say is that there's a homegrown American version of that in the kind of Protestant church that I pastor. So if you're looking for the ancient tradition that is actually native to this land, look no further than these churches that are dotting the landscape that are hundreds of years old, that represent a tradition that goes back through our Puritan forefathers to the Middle Ages, right to that great church that they're longing to connect with. So we have it. Now, the problem is that it's been hijacked by so many progressive and liberal preachers, so that if they walk into one of those old colonial churches, chances are they're not going to find what they're looking for. So my heart goes out to them. And I would say, to the extent that you can seek out the traditional Protestant faith that is alive in this country and help to make it well again, that would be a more noble calling, I think, than importing traditions that are foreign to the American heritage and the American experience. Not that they're wrong, and not that individually you might not be called to go that route, but really, the United States, particularly New England, it's not a bastion of, say, Russian or Greek Orthodoxy. And so if you're really looking for the tradition that is native to this place, it's churches like mine.
Well, I think you need to write an article on that for the Connecticut Sentinel.
That sounds good. That sounds good, Todd.
Pastor, is there anything else you want people to know?
No, I think everyone's always welcome to join us Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. I've got a Substack, experimental sermons, where they can listen to my sermons. I'd love to get live streaming going. So if any of your audience want to contribute to that cause, we could get something set up so that we can broadcast the sermons. That would be great. And I'm always happy to meet new people and welcome them.
Excellent. Pastor Jake Dell from the Woodbury Congregational Church in Woodbury, Connecticut. First Congregational Church. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.